As politicians signal that they just might be getting closer and closer to a stimulus package approved through Congress once again before the end of the year, what are we to make of the debate? Should they even be passing a potentially multi-trillion-dollar package in the first place? Where might we go from here, and where are things at when it comes to the economy? Let's talk about it today on Jimmy at the Crossroads with Stephen Moore. Coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. We're getting started right now.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, and it is such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you once again. Thanks so much for joining us and being a part of the program. Of course, we encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel and follow our videos and content and share that as well. And of course, our partners at the Washington Examiner, be sure to follow all that's going on there at WashingtonExaminer.com. And a little later in the show, I will be talking about the late, great Dr. Walter E. Williams. I had a column commemorating him, his legacy, and his passing, an extraordinary economist, just this week. We'll get to that coming up in a little bit on the show, including with our guest today, Stephen Moore. I am so pleased to have Stephen on the show. He is the co-founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. He is an advisor at FreedomWorks and on the Trump Economic Recovery Task Force, and someone we always like to get insights from when it comes to the economic issues of the day, and he joins me now. Steve, welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. It's good to have you.
Hi, Jimmy. Good to be with you. Loved your piece today on my great friend and mentor, Walter Williams, one of the great economists of the 20th century. I think that only one tragedy from him dying at the age of 84 is that he should have won the Nobel Prize in economics. There's nobody, virtually no one else in the world who could explain free market economics better than Walter Williams.
Well, thank you, sir. And I do want to take a moment to ask you your thoughts on the life and legacy of Dr. Williams, because, man, he was somebody who not only was he able to talk economics in the classroom setting and in the academic world in that research capacity, but he was absolutely incredible at bringing it to the broader public, hence his success filling in for so many years for Rush Limbaugh.
That's exactly right. That's what, he had written many books. He became a household name because of he was many times substituting for Rush Limbaugh, talking to 9 or 10 million people. And he is just an extraordinary man. He was 6'7", great athlete, very irreverent, very funny. I mean, he just had the best sense of humor. I'm just privileged to have called him friend. And I think maybe his most important book was called The State Against Blacks. And it was basically a play on words about how the state, that is the government policies, were actually holding back economic progress. And he talked about things like the minimum wage. He talked about occupational licensing. And then he talked about the welfare state as being enemies of Black America. And one of my favorite quotes from Walter Williams is he said, very famously, he said, no, the Black family in America was able to survive the evils of slavery, of the Jim Crow laws, and segregation. The one thing that the Black family was not able to survive was the welfare state. And he wrote a column shortly before his death, noting that the 3 out of 4 Black children today, almost 3 out of 4 Black children are born in a home without a father. and that is a prescription for disaster.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, this is a man who pursued his mission to the very end, quite literally, as I noted on the day of his passing. He was resoundingly condemning the failure of the education system, particularly when it comes to the Black community.
That's right. He was a big advocate of school choice. He was, really, his course at George Mason University is Economics 100 course, which is something most kind of kids don't want to take Economics 100. I mean, it was always oversubscribed. Everybody wanted to take an article. And one of his famous things, he said, another one, which was really the heart of free market economics. He would say, think about how it is that people in New York City get the best steaks and, T-bone steaks and New York strip steaks. How do they get that, from the cattlemen in Texas? And he'd say, these cattlemen in Texas, they work hard. They work 18-hour days. They tend to that cattle. It's hard work. They put in long hours. And he used to say, do you actually think that these, cattlemen in Texas give a hoot about the well-being of investment bankers in New York? He said, no, they are acting in their own economic self-interest.
Right. Well,
and that's what capitalism is about, is when people keep operate in their economic self-interest and give people what they want, it makes both sides better off. And then that's why capitalism is better than socialism.
Oh, absolutely. And it is a real world contemporary example of Adam Smith's invisible hand. And when he was talking about it's not the benevolence of the butcher that brings us our meat, but his regard for his own self-interest, because people are pursuing their own self-interest. And just one more anecdote, since we're talking about our great tremendous human being. Let's just even start there, the kind of person that he was. And I had the honor and privilege of interviewing him somewhere around a dozen different times on various radio programs and once on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And one of the things that he liked to talk about in terms of the minimum wage was not just the economic harm of the minimum wage in terms of pushing people out of work who might be entry-level workers because of the skills and all of that, but he even talked about the idea that shouldn't an individual have the right to work for whatever amount of money they're willing to work for, and same thing for a business. But even on that individual side, if that person's willing to work for a certain amount, who is the government to get in the way of that transaction?
Well, he was the biggest, you're right, and he was the biggest advocate of economic freedom, allowing individuals, not politicians, to make decisions for themselves.
No doubt about that. May he rest in peace, Walter E. Williams, who passed away on early Wednesday morning, at the age of 84. Stephen Moore, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Let's talk about some of the contemporary issues of the day. It looks like Congress is starting to get towards a deal on a $900 billion plus so-called stimulus package. What's your big picture thought on the idea, first of all, of having another $1 trillion plus stimulus after all the money we've spent on these efforts this year, Stephen Moore?
We don't need another economic stimulus. I have a piece actually in the Wall Street Journal that talks about how the economy has done actually incredibly well. This is the swiftest economic recovery from a recession we've seen in modern times. Everyone was expecting the unemployment rate right now, Jimmy, to be 10-12%, and actually the unemployment rate is less than 7%. It took Trump 5 months to get the unemployment rate down to 7%. It took Barack Obama 5 years to do that. And he did it through the free market. And he did it in spite of the fact that he did not agree to this multi-trillion-dollar spending bill that Pelosi wanted. So it was a smart decision. The economy is doing fine. And I think most of your viewers and listeners know that government spending does not stimulate anything except more government. I mean, actually, this is Walter Williams' truism, but the only way the government can give you, Jimmy, $1 is to take $1 away from me. How does that add to the economy?
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I love pointing out that the idea of a stimulus is a complete misnomer, because government is simply reallocating money from the private economy and just saying, oh, it's going to go here instead of there. And who is the government to even direct that funding in whatever way responsibly or in a way that's actually the most effective use of that money? But they are talking about what to do with unemployment benefits, for example. There are really three legs to the unemployment discussion, of course. One is the traditional unemployment program and just continuing that base level of support. Then there's also allowing gig workers, gig economy workers to access unemployment. And then something else I know you have been talking about for months and expressing deep concern, Stephen Moore, is the idea of the additional payment on top of the base unemployment payment. Talk to us about that aspect.
So Casey Mulligan, who's one of the top labor economists in the country at University of Chicago, and I have worked together on this issue for many months now. And we estimate that what saved, I talked about how many more jobs were created since July, many millions more than anyone expected. And we estimate that about 4 to 5 million jobs were saved by Trump. He saved jobs by not agreeing to Nancy Pelosi's ludicrous idea of giving people $600 a week additional unemployment benefits on top of their normal unemployment benefits. So we found that about 5 out of 6 workers who were unemployed, Jimmy, were going to make more money by staying unemployed than by going back on the job. And in fact, when the economy started to improve back in July or so, you had the weirdest thing. You had 20 million Americans unemployed, and you had employers saying they couldn't get people back on the job as they started, rehiring people. And of course, the reason for that, the economics is pretty simple. If you pay people not to work, they won't work. If you tell people you can make, in some cases, people, Jimmy, you can't make this stuff up. People could make twice as much money staying unemployed and watching TV than going back to the job. And if you got a tough job, a construction job or a manufacturing job, or you're a delivery person, those are tough jobs, a truck driver. And the government's saying, by the way, if you don't take that job, we'll pay you more to stay home. Guess what? A lot of people stayed home. And it wasn't until Trump basically said, no, we're going to stop that policy. Guess what happened? The unemployment rate dropped and people started taking those jobs, which is what we want. We want people to be working, not staying at home.
I'm here in Colorado, and I remember reading an article over on Real Clear Markets, which is overseen by our mutual good friend, John Tamney. And that article was by a small business owner, I think a coffee shop owner or a small restaurateur. And he was expressing how he was reopening. This was several months back. He was finally able to reopen, and he was calling up his employees. And about half of them said, I'm going to wait until the unemployment is up, then I'll come back to work, going to exactly what you're saying about this. And so the big question then is, what should be the guiding principle for our politicians in Washington, D.C., as they look at the idea of whether you want to call it stimulus, and we both agree that it's not really stimulus, or a relief package? What is the guiding principle if they're going to do anything that they should keep in mind, Stephen Moore?
Well, a couple things. First of all, the ultimate stimulus, obviously, is the vaccine, right? The vaccine is what's going to cure the economy and cure our health. It's not going to be government spending programs. That's number one. Number two, just to give you a sense of how crazy some of these stimulus proposals were, at one point, Nancy Pelosi her compromise was a $2 trillion stimulus bill. Now, just to give you a sense of how much money that is, for $2 trillion, Jimmy, we could have suspended the entire income tax for the entire year of 2021 for every single one of the 150 million workers in America and every single one of the 35 million businesses in America. Now, is there any sane person who thinks it would be smarter to pass a handout bill to give money to this industry and that industry and this person that industry versus just telling every worker and business you don't have to pay income taxes? I mean, can you imagine how many jobs we would have next year if no business had to pay any income tax and no worker had to pay income tax? But that gives you a sense of the craziness of Washington. They actually think government handout programs is better than incentivizing people to work.
Well, and also when you look at the nature of the economy and the economic rebound that we have seen, it isn't until the last month or two that the governments across the country, various governments, have started locking down, or at least increasingly moving towards lockdowns, like here in Colorado where I'm at, that the economy started slowing a little bit again.
So this is the other great, important point. I'm glad you mentioned that, which is the way to stimulate the economy is let businesses open up their doors.
Get out of the way.
I was out in California 2 weeks ago. They started shutting down the restaurants. They're not even letting outdoor dining in many parts of California, which is completely absurd. Our schools, I mean, here we are almost a year into this pandemic, and we still have half of the schools in the country shut down when every single piece of evidence, a Mountain Everest amount of evidence, shows that there's virtually zero risk to having kids in school. And in fact, having them stay at home is probably worse for the kids from a health basis, and certainly from an
Oh,
educational
yes.
attainment basis from having them in school. These kids are going to suffer enormously from an entire year without schooling. And think of what that does to a 9 or 10 or 12 or 15 or 18-year-old, not having a year of schooling, because remote learning is a joke. My kids, which are down the hall right now, I guarantee they're on the computer, but I don't think they're doing schoolwork. I think they're playing computer games. So this is really a big problem, and we've made a lot of mistakes. And I'm just heartbroken that all these states continue to lock down their businesses and tell workers they can't go back on the job.
Yeah, and to the education piece is something that I have been speaking and writing about myself quite a bit. In fact, this Friday in a local column in Colorado on a sister publication to the Washington Examiner, the
Right.
Denver Gazette, where I'm a columnist, I'm blasting one of the local school districts, forget this, blaming parents by saying there are two reasons why we are keeping schools closed for in-person learning right now. Number one is because of more incidences of COVID in the county, but number two is minimal reporting of parents of COVID-19 cases. Basically saying parents are underreporting COVID, accusing parents of lying. We've reached new lows, Stephen Moore, as they try to keep kids out of school longer.
Well, if anything good has come out of this, terrible year, and it's been, 2020 is been a horrible year for everyone. Everyone's depressed, and it's just been awful. And everyone knows a loved one who's died of coronavirus. But the one good thing has come out of this is I hope the American people have opened their eyes to how truly, truly selfish and even evil the teachers' unions are. They don't care about kids, folks. All they care about is the union dues. And the fact that if the teachers' unions don't want to teach our kids, then let's get people in our schools who will teach our kids. There are plenty of competent people who can go in and teach our kids and make sure that the kids are getting the learning that they need and the education they need. This is the single greatest of national child abuse in the history of America.
Well, in terms of the teachers union, I very much agree, but I would say that there are a lot of teachers who are doing their job and they're not well represented by the teachers unions because they would like to be teaching and actually doing what they do best for the kids. I know you absolutely agree. So I'm clarifying to make sure that people understand that there are teachers in the classroom that are being prevented from teaching because of interests like the teachers union that don't look out for them.
The union bosses. It's ironic that Joe Biden is considering for the person to run the Department of Education, Randy Weingarten, who's the president of the teachers unions, which I guess would be apropos. I mean, since the teachers unions run that department, they might as well make it official and put the teachers unions to run it. But it is a sad day in America when we cannot get our schools open. Why not just give every family with a child in school $15,000 for every child they have? And if they can't go to the public school, they can go to a Catholic school, a Jewish school, a Montessori school, a charter school, whatever it is. And we now are having to send our kids to the Catholic schools, and I'm Catholic, but because our public schools are shut down. But the government isn't we still have to pay that's the other thing. If you're not going to open up the schools, then give me my property tax money back, because that's what the money is used for.
Well, yeah, and I think also going to this point about school choice, more and more parents are starting to understand that they should have the opportunity to make the kind of choice that you are able to do. Many parents aren't able to say, yes, I want to go put my kid into a private school. Just a few minutes left with our guest, Stephen Moore. He is an advisor at FreedomWorks, the co-founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. By the way, one of those co-founders originally was Larry Kudlow, of course, is a senior economic advisor in the White House, and also he is a member of President Trump's Economic Recovery Task Force. Let's talk about where we may go from here. I mean, this whole idea of a stimulus package, relief package, whatever they want to call it. Biden has said that if and when he gets into office as president of the United States, he's going to build on this. Whatever's happening now is not the end of it for him. He wants to do more of these packages in the next year. And we know how good Joe Biden is at years or summers of recovery, don't we, Stephen Moore?
Yeah, he was the one behind the infamous 2009 Obama $1 trillion stimulus bill. And that was, I call it infamous because it was famous for not creating a single job. In fact, job growth was lower with the stimulus than even the Obama people said if we had done nothing. And, so you have a lot of, pretty left-wing people in the Biden administration coming in. If that happens, I'm not giving up on some of these legal challenges.
Sure.
But look, that Joe Biden is not a moderate. I think one of the mistakes that people made is thinking that he's going to somehow govern from the center. But look at the people he's talking about appointing to these various positions. They're all in favor of bigger government. They're all in favor of higher taxes. They're all in favor of radical environmental policies that will cripple our economy. And it's a sad state of affairs when our best hope, Jimmy, is that Biden just simply can't get done all the crazy things that he wants to do.
Yeah, make no mistake about it. But I do remember still, I was doing college radio at the time when he came out and said, we have a recovery summer. And I was like, okay, let's see how well this works. And it was a complete and utter flop. He doesn't understand.
He finally did get the summer of recovery. That happened in 2017.
That's right. That's right. The first summer
Trump came
out of the Obama-Biden administration.
It is. The good news is that Trump has set up Biden's going to be inheriting a very strong economy from Trump. We're getting, job numbers that are, as I said, very positive. The economic growth rate was 33% in the third quarter. It's on pace to grow by 10% in the fourth quarter. These are blockbuster numbers. It's a shame that people decided to change horses when they were on the back of Secretariat. But, look, I hope for Joe Biden to do the best. I'm not going to root against him. I want the country to do well. But I'm not hopeful. I just don't see a lot of good proposals coming out of Joe Biden or the Democrats right now. And maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised.
Here's a distinct difference, though, between Trump and Biden, and that is President Trump comes from the private sector, understands how jobs are created. Joe Biden has literally spent his whole career, since he was my age, in government and in the public sector. He doesn't understand how an economy really works, Stephen Moore.
Well, you really hit a button with me. I mean, one of the reasons I was attracted to Donald Trump in the first place back in early 2016, I had, developed a friendship with Donald Trump, and I've been really proud of working with him. But that I was attracted to the fact that he had never been in politics, that he was a longtime businessman, and he'd been successful, and he knew how to meet a payroll, and he knew how to build things. I mean, he built buildings, he built, all sorts of hotels, he built amazing resorts. He's a guy who put, tens of thousands of people to work. I loved when the left would denigrate all the business decisions that he made. People have never created a single job in their whole life. And it does make a difference. Donald Trump spent the last 45 years in private sector growing businesses, and Joe Biden has spent his last 45 years in government as a lifetime politician. Who do you think can create more jobs?
That is a question to which I already know the answer, because we can compare when Biden was vice president and told, hey, create jobs, and he failed. And President Trump and the American people told him, hey, create jobs, and he succeeded. Final question for you, Stephen Moore, and I so appreciate your time today joining us on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Let's just get to the fundamentals. How is a job created, and who creates that job?
Well, it's a great question. The jobs are created, most of them in this country, by the heroes of our economy, the men and women who take the risk to start a small business. I've started 3 small businesses in my life. Excuse me. 2 of them were failures. 1 of them succeeded, and that's the national average. 2 out of 3 businesses fail, but the ones that succeed are the ones that employ people. And those are the people who, I always say the small businessman or woman is the last person who gets paid, right? Not the first person. Everybody else has to get paid before, and if there's some money left over, the small business entrepreneur is the one who gets a paycheck when everybody else gets paid, and they expand their business, they invest, they put their whole life into it, and it's heartbreaking to see politicians ruin so many small businesses this year: restaurants, stores, small technology companies, and I just hope that many of them make it through this tough time. They don't need a government check; they just need the government to allow them to operate.
And by the way, since we were talking about Dr. Walter E. Williams earlier, one of his best friends for half a century was Dr. Thomas Sowell. And often we hear the left use this epithetical term known as trickle-down economics, which is absolutely not an actual theory that conservative economists espouse. And I strongly encourage to understand how jobs are created and investment and how that all works. Read Thomas Sowell's writing on trickle-down economics.
I love Thomas Sowell. He's an amazing man. I think he's 90 now. And I love Walter Williams. They're both Black Americans who have been some of the strongest advocates for the free enterprise system we ever had in this country. And Jimmy, it's been a pleasure to be with you. I love your show. I love your columns. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Stephen Moore, best of luck to you, and we'll talk again soon. Once again, Stephen Moore joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, economist at FreedomWorks, the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, and of course, over at President Trump's Economic Recovery Task Force. And I think he hit the nail on the head on a couple of points. Number one, government doesn't stimulate the economy. It just takes money from the private sector economy and reallocates it in a way that it ordains as appropriate, as the best way. That's not stimulus. That's just taking money from one pot and moving it to another pot. And government is the entity making that move. Also, he's absolutely right in terms of how jobs are created and who creates those jobs. It is not government that takes that step and says, okay, we're going to go create these enterprises and these ventures. In fact, you look at the vaccines. Government provided the capital and got out of the way in terms of some of the regulatory hurdles and helped in a couple of different areas, but basically it was the private sector that actually did the research in order to get the vaccines that were needed to help get this economy going and save lives. The private sector did that, not the federal government, even though the feds provided cash. Guarantees, in essence, saying, yes, we will go ahead and we will buy up however much vaccine we're going to buy because we need to get it out there to the American public. But I also want to take a moment, especially since we talked about it with Stephen Moore, but even in general, to recognize for a moment the life and legacy of a man we talked about by the name of Dr. Walter E. Williams. Professor Williams was a noted economist, prolific author. He was a fill-in regularly for Rush Limbaugh's radio show. On Fridays, that's how I got introduced to him. In fact, when I was in high school, he provided my first introduction to free market economics, listening to Walter E. Williams fill in for Rush Limbaugh. Dr. Williams was the John M. Olin Distinguished Professor of Economics at George Mason University for more than 4 decades, and many people would flock to GMU specifically because they wanted to study under the tutelage of Professor Williams. He was a free market economist. He was a passionate, fervent advocate for individual liberty, and he was a syndicated columnist. This was a man who always spoke from the heart and the mind, rooted in lived experience as well as knowledge and understanding of economics. He went up from the projects and into notoriety and success. He was a leading conservative voice when it came to, and libertarian voice, when it came to a whole host of economic issues. And Dr. Williams also was a guest on this very program back in May. And some of the things that we talked about have absolute relevance to what's going on today. In fact, all of the things did, but one particular issue came up in terms of what government can do to help with the economy. Remember, this was a time period where Mark Cuban was going on television, various programs, including this one, talking about a nationwide jobs program, which is what I asked Dr. Williams about. Mark Cuban was on the show yesterday, and we had a spirited debate about his idea for a federal jobs program. What would you contend is why we should not do something like that?
Well, I mean, we had it during the Great Depression in the 1930s, and it did not do very much. Matter of fact, President Roosevelt's Secretary-Treasurer, Morgenthau, Henry Morgenthau, he said in 1939, Mr. President, we spent more money than we've ever spent, and all we got to show for it is debt and no improvement in the economy.
That's the thing, isn't it? That you spend all this money and then there's this revelation, hey, this didn't actually work. So, Dr. Williams, go ahead.
Well, see, the very point is you have to ask the question, where does the government get the money from? I mean, is it the Tooth Fairy or the Santa Claus giving them the money? No. The only way the government can give one American citizen $1 is to first, through intimidation, threats, and coercion, confiscate it from some other American. So if there's a government jobs program, yes, you'll see more people working at government jobs, but you have to say, well, what about over here? That is, a person's taxes have been increased in order for the government to have this program. And what happens to the number of jobs that would have been created if he hadn't been taxed in order to pay for the government jobs?
And that is something Stephen Moore referenced, is that exact argument that Dr. Williams regularly made about how you actually create wealth in the economy and how an economy really functions. And that is the biggest legacy, I think, of Dr. Walter E. Williams. I think the biggest legacy of Walter E. Williams is the ability to take complex economic ideas, or at least ideas that seem complex from an economic standpoint, and boil them down into the essentials in a way that people can understand and cut through some of the muck that gets in the way of really understanding how the world works. Because there are a lot of economists and people in the media who will say, oh, there's this and that economic concept, and you really can't understand it unless you study economics. Having studied economics in college, it was my minor at Regis University. And also delving into these issues, I hosted a morning show called Business for Breakfast on the radio for 2.5 years here in Denver, Colorado. It was something that was much more education, really, than in college. But when you understand these issues and you listen to people who can explain them in ways that really you can follow along with, that's how you do it. And that's what Dr. Williams excelled at. Walter E. Williams absolutely excelled at taking these ideas of economics and breaking them down so people could understand, and also making sure that the facts and the truth were out there on issues ranging from the minimum wage to race and economics. In fact, he wrote a book entitled Race and Economics: How Much Can Be Blamed on Discrimination. He talked about trade and the folly of tariffs, and the list goes on for the kinds of things that Dr. Walter E. Williams was all about educating people on and expressing in very clear and succinct ways. And a dear friend of Walter Williams, Dr. Thomas Sowell, said, quote, Walter once said he hoped that on the day he died, he would have taught a class that day. And that is just the way it was when he died on Wednesday, December 2nd, 2020. Indeed, Dr. Williams taught a class on Tuesday and then passed away after that. We certainly lost a good man, a great economist, a stellar thinker, and a stalwart voice for liberty and freedom, and someone that I was so privileged to have on this program and also on radio shows over the years. It was a treat because he was my first introduction to free market economics and understanding how an economy really works. So to be able to interview him over the years was a real treat, especially given the fact that he really could boil down issues of the day in a way that average people could actually understand, because economics really shouldn't be that complicated. And as I say in my article for the Washington Examiner, in Dr. Williams' memory and in his call, may we all join the struggle to sell our fellow Americans on the moral superiority of personal liberty and its main ingredient, limited government. That was actually part of a quote that he had given me when he was on board with the Millennial Policy Center, a think tank that I founded and was privileged to have him on board as an advisory council member. Rest in peace and keep suffering no fools, Dr. Walter E. Williams, 1936, 2020. Well, that is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. My great thanks to Stephen Moore for joining us here on today's edition of the program, to the Washington Examiner, our partners on Jimmy at the Crossroads, as always, and of course, most especially to you for watching, liking, subscribing, sharing our content, all that good stuff. Really appreciate you being along for the ride. By the way, we are catching up our podcast, the audio podcast of Jimmy at the Crossroads. We're above 70 episodes, working finally getting them on Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts. Be sure to check them all out. They're now available increasingly. We're catching up. We're getting closer. I appreciate your support and your sharing, passing along what we've got here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Have a great day. We will be back next week with more episodes. Ruben Navarrete, Congresswoman-elect Kat Kemick, and more. Keep it right here. Once again, Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, and may God bless America.